Hi again, everyone. So that's where the video quit working. So we are just going to pick up right where we left off, where we last left each other, talking about the whole to parts classical and the parts to whole official. Was the Industrial Revolution had hit, and those ideas that were taking hold in the factories for high levels of productivity were going directly into the schools. And I don't think I'd even written this yet. So anyway, so that idea of parts to whole really took place. And the idea of mimicry, of fragmentation, and having discrete steps and stages. So I'm going to go ahead and add that. Mimicry, fragmentation, and having discrete steps. So first you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this. Because remember over here in the Sages of the Ages with Socrates and the classical theory, it was very much holistic. Everything was looked at in kind of like how the relationship, how things affect one another, the influences on one another. So with the advent of the Industrial Revolution, all of a sudden those holistic threads are separated. And so mimicry, fragmentation, discrete parts. Okay, so this really hits hard, and now we're coming through the 1800s. It becomes more and more a part of the schools. We come through the 1900s. Still, this is very much becoming more and more a part of our schools. And at this time, and Google these names that I toss out. At this time, there's a guy in Russia, and his name is Lev Vygotsky, and that's Levvygotsky, but I can only spell it, Vygotsky. And he was writing in Russia, and what he was looking at, he's like had this fascinating life. What he was looking at is that education takes place within a socio-cultural context, and that thought and language and education are all so woven together that they can't be separated. And so this is all about those thought and language and collaboration, community. So he's looking at all of these ideas: thought, language, collaboration, sociocultural context, and how none of that can be separated. He actually died at age 40 of tuberculosis, but left this amazing amount of work, which all of that was happening, but it really wasn't leaving Russia at this time. So we come through here, of course, then, you know, what hits is World War I. And so we've got World War I, and the factory productions go into overtime. This school of thought becomes known as the scientific management model. These are not anything you need to memorize or anything like that. Just kind of get a sense of the holistic and what this background is. Scientific management model. And people are doing experiments on animals. That whole idea of stimulus and response. So we've got Pavlov, we've got Thorndike, and they are taking what they're finding when they're working with rats and dogs. You know, the whole Pavlov's dog, I mean, that's kind of the classic one. And all of that is also now going into the schools. And so some names that are associated with this kind of becomes known, this kind of morphs and becomes known as behaviorism. So, which we've read about, and when you think about the readings that we're doing, where does behaviorism fall as far as transmission, generative, and transformative? Behaviorism. And so what we have is the influence of what's working in factories, what's working in animals, and it's going directly into schools. So we come through World War I. Lev Vygotsky, this is going on up here. I'm going to have to move my little setup here so you can see what's going on. Okay, and then we come to World War II. And the factory model again, you scoot this so you can see, the factory model again is really going. This is when, you know, a lot of times people will say back to the basics, and we need to get back to the basics. Usually it's kind of this era that they're talking about. So 1940, 1945, 1950s, behaviorism really takes hold, really becomes a part of the school system, and it's how many of us, it's our experiences as we were growing up. It's the rows, teacher in the front of the room, teacher, you know, filling the empty vessels. I'm going to keep moving this so you can keep up with our timeline. Okay, so this is happening, behaviorism, and then the 1960s hit. And at that time, there's this guy called Paulo Freire, and we've read about him, and I invite you to Google him and read some more. Paulo Freire. His last name is spelled Freire, and he is in Brazil. And he's teaching the peasants in Brazil how to read. And he's teaching them how to read in 30 hours or less. Because they're learning how to read not only the word, but they're learning how to read the world, which is actually one of the books that he wrote. And they're learning how to read so quickly because they are reading words that have meaning to them. They're learning, you know, these are the peasants in Brazil. It was during the time of the dictatorship. So they were learning how to read words like poverty, hunger, strike, dictatorship. They were not learning how to read abstract words that had nothing to do with their life, like, you know, see Dick run, see Jane play with a ball. They were learning how to read authentically, and they were learning how to read words that were very meaningful to their lives. So up here, I'm going to put meaning. Meaningful, I mean personally meaningful to one's own lived experiences. Authentic. Purposeful. And so the dictatorship, you know, what they did not want the peasants learning how to do was to read. They did not want their peasants becoming literate. So they promptly, actually, as soon as this got out, they kicked Paulo Freire out of the country for the next 25 years. And he fled to Switzerland, where he continued to write for the next 25 years. The dictatorship eventually fell. Paulo Freire returned to Brazil as their minister of education, secretary of education, and I actually had the opportunity to hear him speak shortly before he died. One of his classic works is Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and he kind of looked like Gandhi. I mean, he was like this little wise, twinkly-eyed, you know, I mean, there were like 7,000 of us there listening to him. And but what he really looked at was how education takes part and happens most meaningfully and most effectively if it's part of one's own lived experience in collaboration and names the world that is happening around them. So it's not like what happens at school is separate than what happens in the rest of life. And at this point, these schools of thought, and I'm going to write right here so you can still see, this as many different frames of reference in schools of thought, but primarily it's known as progressivism. So we're going to write progressivism, critical pedagogy, social reconstructionism, which really gets people's attention, social reconstructionism. Okay, so then this really kind of continues well into the 1980s. We're still very much much of some of the influences that are affecting schools are about reading the word, reading the world, that education takes place in collaboration, it takes place in community, it takes place when you are exploring big ideas and there are not single answers. So that takes place until then. I'm going to move us a little bit more. And then in the 1990s, there are some big changes that happen. And so about the 1990s, what is going to become No Child Left Behind starts in Texas. So No Child Left Behind. It started with when then Governor George W. Bush brought these ideas of Primarily, standardized tests, very much more along the lines of memorization, mimicry, standardized tests. These really hit in Texas. Now, one of the back stories to that is in the kind of upper echelons of the business circles in Texas were some publishers, and those publishers became phenomenally rich once all of Texas was mandated to use their textbooks, take their tests. I mean, all of those prescribed curriculums, someone is making, they're very profitable. Someone's making a lot of money off of those. And so that hit first in Texas and really moved away from holistic critical reflection and moved far more into the ideas of behaviorism. And it hit in Texas, then it went to California, it went to New York, and then when George W. Bush became president is when it really went across the United States. And so that really brings us, so that started in the 90s. And then what that became was Race to the Top under Obama. It's called Race to the Top. Other language for it is the accountability. This is where like merit pay for teachers. All of these ideas very much fall under the official theory of teaching and learning. So if we look back, and I'm just going to kind of scan, if we look back over the course of these years, so we start over here with Socrates, and remember the critical inquiry, critical reflection, whole to parts, holistic, and then we move to the Industrial Revolution, and it's mimicry, memorization, summarize, one right answer, do the same thing again and again and again. And so we come down here. Meanwhile, Lev Vygotsky is exploring, looking at thought, language, collaboration, the socio-cultural context of ed. Meanwhile, we come back down, World War II hits, we move back into a real behavioristic kind of pedagogy that really influences schools. We come into the 1960s, Paulo Freire is writing, progressivism, critical pedagogy, all of those ideas, holistic, are taking hold, and then we move into the 1990s, and now, that's definitely where we find ourselves, 2014, that's definitely where we find ourselves right now. And so when you look back at the narrative arc of time, this whole kind of push-pull and moving between these philosophies has really been going on for a long time. And a lot of times people will say, we need to go back to the basics, the 3 R's. Like I said, what they're usually talking about at that point is behaviorism, is around, like this seems to be the heyday that people tend to point to, that really didn't work well for you as a student if you were African American or Native American, Mexican American, Asian American. There were vast swaths of students who this time period that it often is like reflected upon as the golden age of education, it really didn't work well for vast amounts of the students. And so that's something that, as people, when we're talking about all of these ideas, we have to remember this. And so I just wanted to give you kind of a sense of the big picture of these ideas. And one of the things you'll find, and we've talked about this in the on-campus class, but I wanted to share. And one of the things you'll find is when you're in education, since everybody went to school, everybody is an expert. And so whether they studied pedagogy, whether they studied, any of the ideas that you're learning about, because people went to school, they really feel themselves to be an expert in education. And so just know that when you're in education, as opposed to, I think, other fields where people maybe don't have a sense of expertise so much, these conversations are going to come up again and again and again. And people have a lot of ideas about what should be happening in education right now. So whatever your own philosophical groundings, and I think right now they're emergent, and a lot of what we're studying is maybe giving language to what you already know in your gut. It's giving voice to that. Just really understand what that is, what it means, what it means when we go into the classroom, and teach from a really grounded place. So anyways, I hope that this timeline has been helpful. I apologize that it was broken up into two different pieces. It